The information contained in this video is strictly for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or other professional advice and is not a substitute for consultation with a qualified professional. The opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect the views of the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and the City University of New York. State of Mind is a web-based discussion program that explores the relevant social, economic, and political issues that are prominent at the post-secondary level of education. State of Mind is sponsored by the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. BMCC. Start here, go anywhere. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna Nadella, and this is State of Mind. Continuing on our Let's Talk About Sex series, today we're here to talk about our specific topic of sexual assault and date rape. Back with us again to talk about the topic and provide their unique perspectives are the following guests. To my immediate left is Dr. Michael McGee, an assistant professor in the Health Education Department at the Borough of Manhattan Community College and an adjunct professor at the Center for Human Sexuality Studies at Widener University. Prior to that, Dr. McGee was Vice President for Education at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and also served as the Executive Director of the World Association for Sexual Health. He received a Master's of Education at PhD from Widener University and a Bachelor's from SUNY Empire State. Thank you, Dr. McGee.
Thank you.
Next to Dr. McGee is Ms. Jennifer Baumgardner, the Executive Director and Publisher at the Feminist Press at CUNY. Ms. Baumgardner is a writer, activist, filmmaker, and lecturer whose work explores abortion, sex, bisexuality, rape, single parenthood, and women's power. She attended Lawrence University, where she helped organize Guerrilla Theater, a feminist group on campus, and started an alternative newspaper called The Other that focused on issues of women's liberation. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So to kick off the show, I'd like to just provide some content that I think will really frame up what we're trying to discuss. Earlier this year, President Obama created a federal task force aimed at combating campus sexual violence. This task force unveiled recommendations for helping colleges and universities respond to the problem. The initial recommendations aimed to tackle 4 of the most pressing issues. 1, identifying the scope of the problem on college campuses. 2, preventing sexual assaults. 3, helping schools respond more effectively to student allegations. And 4, beefing up the federal government's own enforcement efforts. With that said, here are some statistics I think will help give us a better idea of how prevalent sexual assault is. At least 80% of all sexual assaults are committed by an acquaintance of the victim. More than 70% of rape victims knew their attackers, compared to about half of all violent crimes. On average, at least 50% of college students' sexual assaults are associated with alcohol use. And finally, at least 1 in 4 college women will be the victim of a sexual assault during her academic year. Michael, Jennifer, why is sexual assault so prevalent on campus?
It's just so prevalent in general. In fact, I mean, the statistic I always hear is 1 in 5, but I think, it goes back and forth depending on how you're gauging it. But I do know that the statistics have not changed in the last 40, 50 years, if ever. And so that's one of the issues. It's very depressing to me because there isn't a soul on this earth who isn't negatively affected by sexual assault, even if you haven't been directly raped. It warps all of our sexuality for sure. But I'm kind of amazed by how hard it is for people to meaningfully address it. And I'm very excited about Obama being the first sitting president to actually say something, to just say something from his pulpit. But a little bit wary about what's going to come out of that because previous acts that have attempted to deal with sexual assault, like the Clery Act, et cetera, have mainly served to provide some sort of hoop that the university needs to jump through, but there hasn't been any sort of meaningful change, certainly no meaningful change in these statistics.
I think, one of the issues, like the Clery Act, is, for folks who don't know, since 1990, all colleges and universities have to report what their sexual assault policies are and then report the number of crimes committed on campus. And one of the challenges of that is that it's a notoriously underreported crime, and very often, even when someone goes to the school counseling office or whatever to get help, it often isn't reported to the police. So it sometimes is not investigated. And so this sort of idea of just hoops to go through as an administrative thing isn't really what's needed to solve the problem. I mean, it's a huge issue that goes beyond colleges and universities, but it's a societal problem, and one that we're not going to solve in this program, I don't think.
Yeah.
So
I'll agree with
fair
that.
enough. But if the average age of a college student is between the ages of 18 and 22, as we've discussed before, how much of a factor do hormones, stimulants, and antisocial behavior play into the mindset of an assaulter?
Well, of the assaulter, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of analysis of perpetuators, I call them, so people who perpetuate rape. And the basic consensus, I would say, among reputable people is that most rapists are serial rapists, so that it's a repeat offender, a predatory person, etc. And I accept that, certainly. I also think, though, that there's a lot of sexual activity that's coerced, that by somebody who maybe isn't a repeat offender, or in the moment, well, I don't know, maybe they are a repeat offender, but I guess there's a lot of sexual activity where the person who was exploited would have a hard time calling it rape, just wouldn't feel like she wanted to own that term, or the man who had that experience wouldn't feel like he wanted to own that term. And so when you're talking about rape with individual students, they will often disclose this kind of sexual assault, but they are not at all people who are going to go and press charges at all, and not just because nothing happens when you press charges. And then when you said, I think that the alcohol piece or the stimulants or whatever, I think that's huge.
Okay.
Not in terms of it doesn't create a rapist. It just helps create the unsafe environment and the vulnerable environment, absolutely. Cannot overstate how much alcohol and drugs play a role. But I think that this idea of this all of these people who are predators, you know, it happens so much way before college. In fact, a lot of, when I was interviewing women for my film, it was rape. A lot of the women, they would talk about a rape that happened in college or sometimes in high school, but in many cases something had happened before that too. So I think we have a world where violating people, vulnerable people, is acceptable, and where, and then, you know, just drawing back even a little bit further from there, a world where misogyny is so acceptable. So there's certain people who you're allowed to do things to, and those are the people we rape, and they don't get, there's no repercussion.
I was interested in the way you phrased the question, starting off with hormones, and I think that's the least of it. I mean, it's true that males have 10 to 15% more, or times more testosterone, and that is the sex drive and aggression hormone. But, you know, that's one of the things adolescent boys learn how to manage, that's one of their developmental tasks. But I agree with Jennifer that, you know, substances play a huge role, because it's hard to know if you're loaded, whether or not, where the line is when you cross it. And there was a report from the National Institute of Justice that said a third of rapes are never reported because the woman doesn't understand that what happened was illegal, or that harm was intended. It's that, you know, mushy thing of, well, it is, it isn't, where do we, it's hard to kind of nail that down. And I think a lot of it is, as Jennifer said in the last episode, that place where people are fumbling. A lot of people have a drink or two in order to loosen up the inhibitions and so on, and then sometimes drunk sex happens, and people don't realize that if you're drunk, you can't consent, and if somebody wakes up the next morning and says, I did not want that to happen, you know, you can be accused of rape and win a case.
And there's so many more psychological barriers to seeing it as rape as the person who's been raped. So I'll just jump into one that I can think of. So when I was 12, my sister who was 14 was raped. First time she was at a party drinking. A friend raped her. And at the time, I mean, I remember hearing about it, you know, through like hearsay, because, you know, all the kids were gossiping. No one called it rape. My sister didn't call it rape until she went to college and like took a women's studies course and, you know, whatever, met other people where they were like, actually, because you were passed out. And she wasn't, you know, she said no, and she was fighting him off. And but just the idea of a friend treating you that poorly, or thinking that you're someone that they can just do anything to, That's also so hard for people to confront, that it would be better to say, oh yeah, I'm just, whatever, I was into it. Right. And so I've interviewed a tremendous amount of young women where they were raped by someone that they went on to date, because reclaiming some power in the relationship, or reclaiming like, oh, that person doesn't think I'm a piece of, what, they like me, they want to date me.
Right.
And it was really a lesson in how many ways rape hurts a person or steals something from a person, even an opportunity to say, that was wrong.
So let me ask you a question, because, and I don't want to marginalize this in any way, but for the victim, is a good portion of that just being at the wrong place at the wrong time?
I don't know. I mean, anytime something bad happens, 9/11, if
Right.
you were in the World Trade, it was that being in the wrong place at the wrong.
Right.
It's, nothing excuses it
Mm-hmm.
at all. And it's so common, so it would be hard to be in the right place, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's like being in a woman's body is kind of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Being in a woman's body between the ages of, let's say, 11 to
Right.
35. I don't know what the outside edge is there.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything to add to that. I can't imagine, what is the right place to be raped?
All right.
Yeah.
So let's take it from another angle. Why is it so hard for consent to be categorized as black or white versus shades of gray?
Well, some of the stuff that we've talked about, that fumbling stuff, I think we don't have, as a culture, there are a couple of things. One is gender stuff, the stereotype about, a real man is in control, loses their virginity, dumps their virginity as soon as they possibly can.
Right.
And, to be a stud or a player, you have sex with as many women as you can.
Yeah, always wants to have sex, never doesn't
Right,
want
right,
to.
right.
So there's a social imperative that guys are having to enact that I don't think is true
Which is
either.
baloney, but
Yeah.
there are people who subscribe to that notion. And then for women who are, invested in, to the extent they are, to a stereotype of being nice and accommodating and friendly and, open, where girls were supposed to be the gatekeepers and it's just a game. You're supposed to say no the first time, but then it's, no. And we know that's not real. All that rape culture stuff. So I think there's a bunch of that kind of gender stereotypes that we're getting less of, but it's still pretty pervasive. Okay. And I think the other aspect of that is that we don't have enough models for, romantic comedies of how do you say yes. We have all of these programs saying no means no, and
Right.
no, right. But how do you say yes? We don't teach kids how to do that. When I ask my students, okay, so you're with your honey, your sweetheart, and you want to have sex, and, how does that go? How do you communicate? And they're usually astonished that I ask the question, but then, they say, well, it's not with words. It's, you gestures, and you don't shrug off a hand here or there, or, and if you don't say no, then it means yes, which is kind of that gray area.
Right.
It's not with verbal stuff.
Yeah, or if you just sort of are lying there, that kind of means no, but you're not, but you're also just still lying there, so I agree. I think that there's such profound, or what you're making me think of, there's such profound embarrassment around narrating any form of desire, which is why porn and alcohol stuff, they do the heavy lifting, because there's just so much embarrassment about either not knowing what you're doing, or saying I want something, or saying I want to try this thing, I don't know, who knows what'll, if it'll work or not, and just sort of sniffing around until you find what you like is that, good sex is vulnerable sex, not predatory sex, but, vulnerability from both parties is needed. And I think that's really hard to teach somebody that's okay, because it's very scary, I think. I'm 44, and I would say I'm like way beyond where I used to be, but it wasn't like when I turned 30 I knew what I was doing. It's I'm still learning, and I'm married. I feel like I'm in a reasonably safe zone to kind of continue to fumble. I can't believe things weren't worse when I was little for me because of how repressed I was, how scared I was to say anything.
Fair enough. So it's been reported that students found responsible for sexual assaults on campus often face little or no punishment from school judicial systems, while their victims' lives are frequently turned upside down. Why is it so hard to punish those that commit these crimes? And more importantly, what type of deterrents need to be installed so that we don't see repeat offenses?
Well, if somebody commits a felony against you, don't go to your dean, go to the police. I mean, it would be one kind of glib way of putting it, but it's like, what are you expecting from a judicial system at your school that's mainly dealing with plagiarism?
Fair enough.
In a meaningful way.
Right.
Yeah. And schools don't want to be known as, the place where girls aren't safe, or boys for that matter. It's a small percentage, but males get sexually assaulted as well. But it hurts enrollment. Nobody wants to send their daughter to a school where this was in the news.
Right.
Oh, all the football players, raped that girl. And so, it gives you second thoughts about whether or not I want to go there. And fundraising takes a hit.
Of course.
It's one of those things that you don't want to publicize or hold up, make an example of somebody because they did this bad thing.
But don't the schools have a responsibility at some level to take ownership of this?
Sure.
They do, but there's no meaningful framework yet for them to do that. I mean, I'm really interested to see, now that there's Title IX implications for college campuses to actually provide a safe environment for their students, based on these sexual assaults. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen, because a lot of schools have dedicated Title IX specialists now.
Sure.
And some of them are these incredible people who've been working on this issue forever and been working on rape on college campuses forever. They're very realistic. They ought to work meaningfully with administrators, student activists, all of that. And it's a really disparate group. Sometimes something you do that actually could be a concrete advance for the school, a student activist will feel like it doesn't speak to them.
Sure.
So there's a lot of still so much kind of misinformation or missed connections. And so we'll see if these Title IX coordinators can do something more meaningful. But to put in a plug for something I'm working on, I'm doing a book right now at the Feminist Press called Slut. And it's the centerpiece is this play called Slut, which is really incredible. It was written in collaboration with New York City high school students about that experience of being slutted after a sexual assault and what that whole process is. And, but one of the essays is by this Title IX coordinator at MIT, and she's making a top 10 list of the 10 things that you should ask when you're on your college tour to make sure that your school is compliant in a meaningful way with Title IX. And so those sorts of things, they're small, but they give me hope, because I think that is a tool and a frame that certainly I didn't have when I was looking at colleges.
Okay. So on the topic of work that you've done and work that you are doing, in 2008, Jennifer, you created the It Was Rape Project, designed to highlight the prevalence of rape in our culture and to interrupt the silence and shame that surrounds it. Why, in 2014, is it still so difficult for victims of sexual assault and rape to come forward and speak about it? You had mentioned shame. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I think that people don't really want to hear about it because it's so scary to empathize with someone's vulnerability that way and to realize that it could happen to you. So there's a lot of distancing, like, well, that won't happen to me because I'm different than you. And so I do think that people who've been sexually assaulted often are trying to find ways to talk about it, but often don't find receptive audiences, shall we say. And then the other thing is, and a lot of the women that I interviewed said they didn't want to be reduced to that experience. So they, that experience irrevocably changed them, but it isn't the whole story. And so with the film part of the project, I took pains, but it was also so clearly the way it needed to be, to show their whole lives and that they had good lives.
Right.
But also to not minimize the impact that this like one night had on their lives from some person who, and I would really love to do a companion piece where I talked to the men. And one of the reasons I didn't, in this case, all of the assailants were men, although that's not always the case, because I would like, and one of the reasons I didn't is I know that we would empathize to some degree with their point of view, because you can't help when you're actually interviewing someone, because rapists are actually more than rapists as well. They have lives, and they're people. We don't reduce them to that. We're so scared of reducing someone to being called a rapist, in the same that we don't seem to extend that same courtesy to a rape victim.
Right.
But it's very hard for people to think that somebody that they like could actually do something like that. Whereas we have to be able to imagine that, or we're never going to be able to acknowledge this problem, because it is going to be people that we like.
Right. So from an academic standpoint, both of you are associated with the CUNY system, and both of you are educators, role models, and guidance figures. How do you interact with students? And have you had students who approached you and said, I think I've been raped, and what is it from your standpoint as an academic? How do you deal with that?
Well, similar to what we were talking about in the last episode of being a welcoming and affirming presence, a safe space for somebody to tell their story. When I was teaching last semester, when I was teaching the chapter on sexual violence and so on, I was saying, if you know somebody who has been sexually assaulted or raped, don't ask them questions about why were you there, why did you go with him, why were you wearing that, why, why did you drink that. Those questions are not helpful. Okay. At that point, somebody can internalize that as it's my fault, that stuff. And so say, I'm so sorry that happened, what can we do, let's report it, let's be there for them. And after class, a young woman came up to me and said, that was so helpful. I wish, my friends, when I had been raped, I wish my friends had heard that, because they were asking all of those questions and made me feel worse. And in these papers that they write, private papers, many people have been assaulted. And I write on, I am available to talk to you, and the counseling center on the 3rd floor can be helpful, and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they do seek me out afterwards. Sometimes they do follow up and go to the counseling center. But I think being a safe person to talk to is helpful.
I think people are dying to disclose because it's a big burden to carry that story inside of you, and the shame associated with it, all of that. And so anyone who signals that they can hear it and will be sympathetic will have no shortage of stories. And with the Rape Project, people always ask me how I found people. And the sad truth is, it's incredibly easy. I could walk out of here and find 5 people really, really easily. I could be in this room and find 5 people, maybe, And I've spoken at about 300 colleges in the last 12 years, and I've never mentioned rape where people haven't come up to me afterwards. And I often mention it because it's a big feminist issue,
Right.
And another thing I often do is I'll say, feminism is a movement to try to create space for people to be their whole selves, to not deny the experiences we've had, be able to bring them into the room with us, which is it's not easy. There aren't that many places where you really feel like you can take every part of you, whether it's your conservative parents or whatever it is, and bring it in the room with you. But feminism aims for that, whether or not we always achieve it. And then I'll say, for instance, incest, gay parents, an alcoholic uncle, my brother's in jail. I'll just name a bunch of things that I just keep hearing from life that I just know is pretty common. And afterwards, it's amazing to me what people will disclose and all of the intersecting issues. Wow. And the one that I guess surprises me the most, I guess because I have the deepest level of denial around it, is incest. How incredibly common that is. And I think that's because there's so many more barriers to disclosing, because you could really lose relationships that you really, really count on too, or everyone could be mad at you or whatever. That one has been really remarkable to me about how what a burden that is to have gone through that experience and then be attempting to receive any sort of support around it.
So let's talk about education, because I think there's some work that needs to be done, for lack of a better phrase. In a survey of high school students, 56% of girls and 76% of boys, some of whom may be incoming college freshmen, believed forced sex was acceptable under some circumstances. Realizing that education is the strongest way to counter any issue, how much responsibility do high schools need to take in educating young women, and more importantly, men, as to what constitutes sexual assault and rape and the consequences of both?
It has to happen way before high school, first of all.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that.
And I want to know about that study. I want to look that up, because it's okay under what circumstance? I'm fascinated.
Acceptable under some circumstances.
If they went out on a date. I mean, I have seen these sort of lists
If
before.
If nothing was sent, there was no one that explicitly said no. Situations like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to believe when you think of the statistics of the actuality of rape. I do think it's a little bit of a setup, almost, almost the wrong questions in a way.
Okay.
Because I think the more meaningful thing is around all of this awkwardness and shame and conflict around sex. And then beneath that, all of the misogyny underneath that, that makes it so it's okay to do certain things to certain people because they're expendable and they're not fully human.
Right.
So that's the kind of education or deep thinking I would want to do. I think statistics are really useful in terms of just providing a really quick snapshot, but in terms of actually changing someone's beliefs or helping someone understand a different belief system or to shift, I think it's very easy to distance yourself from statistics.
Okay, so let's talk about society.
Okay.
Are we better informed and educated in regards to sexual assault And have we made the strides that are necessary to make a significant enough impact to punish those who commit it? We talked about the school judicial system. Let's talk about society now. Where are we in 2014?
Oh, I feel grim.
Yeah, I don't think we've made, I mean, the part of the question that was about have we made enough strides, I don't think we've made much progress really in decades. And the punishment question bothers me in that, I mean, nobody should get a free ride, God knows. You know, they have to be accountable and all of that, and we can't have it go unpunished. But I'm more on the prevention end of it than the punishing it afterward end of it.
Well, because prison doesn't provide an opportunity for accountability anyway. Because accountability is truly facing what you did.
Right.
Not being so shamed and humiliated or punished, you know, put in a place where you just feel defensive or you're just more embittered. I mean, fully facing what someone did, I don't know what the mechanism would be for that. Having an creating more opportunities for truth and reconciliation between rapists and victims.
I think, as Jennifer said, the sort of educational effort or cultural shift that needs to happen, you know, has to go through every segment of society and all of the institutions of society to be respectful of one another, you know. I mean, if you believe in the golden rule, I mean, very simplistic sort of looking at that, but just at the fundamental level, helping people learn how to be respectful of each other. And if you are interested in being sexual with somebody, that there should be some ways to learn how to do that in ways that are mutual and equitable and respectful and fun.
Yeah.
Right. So let's take it from a different slant then, because it was a very open-ended question. What is the responsibility of the government, advocacy groups, and the media when it comes to education? Because if they're not going to get it from home, if they're not necessarily going to get it from those that are in their social circle, what can we do as a society to educate?
Well, I mean, I agree that those are just pillars of, those are just different institutions, and it has to flow through all of them. I'm trying to think of what's the institution that's going to set this off, you know. I mean, I think if there was any sort of opportunity or framework for true communication, accountability, respect, empathy, authentic versions of that at a young age, in a generation of something enormous could happen. But I don't really know how to, because they don't see it modeled necessarily. You see the way we treat one another in this world, and people see their moms or their dads mistreated.
Do we talk about sexual assault and date rape enough in this society? Or do we talk about it too much?
Probably not enough, and certainly not in meaningful ways.
Yeah. I think when we do talk about it, it's in that this is bad, and then the kind of exploitative movies about rape and all of that. There's just, it's a dangerous topic in a whole lot of ways, and we have so much moralism around sexual behavior to begin with that when it's, you know, about abusive sexual behavior, you know, it's just, well, that's bad, and send them to jail.
Right.
But, you know, that's not enough.
Right. Well, so I think of the media. I think of movies like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and you see a forced rape scene. What type of image are we giving? Because in one sense, you're adding it for dramatic effect. There is part of the storyline. But in the other sense, you have impressionable people who are seeing this maybe for the first time and starting to wonder, well, is it acceptable to acknowledge that and go on with the rest of your life after the 2 hours are over for the film? What is the paradox, the hypocrisy, so to speak, that we need to address? I
think that we are the media as opposed to the media is influencing us. I think, well, I mean, obviously media does, but I think the media reflects where we're at. It doesn't set the tone, and I mean, it is us. And when it comes to things like, you know, movies that are entertainment, I mean, I've been very moved and learned things about sexual assault from movies. But in general, I'm not a big one to be like, oh, let's go protest that movie because it showed some sort of sexual behavior that I don't approve of.
Right. I think media literacy, again, is important to help people deconstruct that stuff, to think critically about what's happening, you know. and who produced it, why, usually for money or
Yeah.
a political agenda or whatever, but to help people pick it apart, just so that skill is there.
Well, Michael, Jennifer, you were right about one thing. We definitely didn't solve the problem today, but I'd like to thank you both for your time to at least talk about it.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
On that note, I'll wrap up our show today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and offering their very unique perspectives. If you like what you saw in the episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you'd like to contact me, you can reach out to me by email or Twitter. Once again, my sincerest thanks, and remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.